Welcome, 8th International Conference on English Language and Teaching. This is Richard J. Stockton. I'm going to speak about EAL learner identity research through fictional narrative cases in Indonesia, TESOL. By way of purpose, it came to my attention that there is a gap or a divide between use of story and research on the one hand, which is retroactive in its theoretical foundations, and on the other hand, narrative inquiry, which is also widely used in TESOL and is constructivist in its theoretical basis. They both are based on story and narrative, so there ought to be a way that they can be connected. So how can that be done? So I started with Zoltán Dörnyei, who did very large-scale quantitative survey research and interview and statistical analysis, and developed a model of a L2 self with individualistic ideal self, a traditional ought to self, and a learner experience self. Unfortunately, some problems started to emerge. So pictured below is Martin Lam, and he did most of his research in Indonesia, or a significant part. And what he found was that ideal self only manifests in cosmopolitan, big urban settings, and that ought to self is very difficult to identify at all. So what sort of methodology could detect ideal and ought to self? I looked at arts-based research, which is controversial in that it's a relatively new form of research, and its methodologies and how it ought to be assessed are not entirely worked out. Nonetheless, I ran a series of pilots where I had students, high school students in a urban setting, write in English stories based on completing a template based on Dörnyei's L2 self model. And the stories were then expressions of the themes, conflicts, and basically represented metaphors of how they saw themselves and their identity. And I used grounded theory to analyze the stories. Now, by way of findings and results, it was very easy coding the stories to find both traditional ought to self identity represented and also individualistic ideal self or millennial global self represented. And another unfortunate finding was that there was a lot of confusion and aimlessness that I could see as themes in the stories. So in conclusion, there's a risk of a disconnect between, on the one hand, Eurocentric and cosmopolitan TESOL institutions and publications, and on the other hand, the stakeholders, the teachers, and the learners who value their traditional identity. So, in summation, in English language teaching, it's very important to appreciate there is an emerging global individualistic ideal L2 self, and also a very strong ATU traditionalist self, although other methodologies have had difficulty registering it in arts-based research and grounded theory. It's not too hard to spot.